appeared in Poetry Daily. At any given time, she only owned one sturdy bra. After a while, white rubber threads escaped the cotton shell, and the shoulder straps curled in delicate scallops over her shoulder. She bowed to settle her breasts into the cups. Her father, a preacher who believed in the virtue of thrift, allowed 1 square of toilet tissue, 3 if necessary. His pencils, she told us many times, as if, though he died when she was young, she still could not believe. He arranged by size, each sharp as the poison of certainty. From the alley on winter school day afternoons in the cold and hoary dark, I watched her in the haloed light of the stove's hood. I could see her contentment or her anger in how she bent to her task. She'd woven a nest of silence and dark around herself. I wanted to enter it a pilgrim, but did not know how. See, she's really good. So the book I had the pleasure of publishing in March 2020, if you remember March 2020, is with the wonderful Minnesota Press, Tinderbox Editions. Many applauses to Molly, this book is my most recent poetry collection. It's called The State She's In. The state I am in right now is, well, not the second, is Virginia. So that's not where I'm from, but that's where I took a job in the 90s and have worked ever since. And it was a long time before I kind of admitted that I was there and therefore complicit in a lot of ugly stuff that happens in that beautiful small town, because it is basically the home, one of the homes of the Confederacy, and Robert E. Lee is buried just down the hill from my office, and his horse. So I'm going to read you, The State She's In is about multiple subjects, but one of them is, I did a lot of historical and archival research trying to figure out more about this place. In the process, I started taking a different walk to work, and this poem is about that. It's called State Roads. One route is Lee Street, named for Robert E., past the antebellum mansions and 3-story pines, polishing brick pavements with your boot soles, past the magnolia older than bees and shining hard, its branches a hoop skirt or cave for rage, past the only post office in the country not labeled post office because the locals loathed the feds, as they still do, with or without raising a battle flag. Or consider a dirtier, unsanctioned path between Catholic church and frat house, lined by dumpsters, past food service guys smoking on the loading deck near the constricted concrete steps leading to the clinic, preferable not for what some call grit, but because the mud tells who has trudged that way, plus it keeps accepting signatures. Today, late snow gagged the daffodil mouths, but they kept yelling. Another thing I'm doing in this book, although I don't think it's always visible, is I was pushing my 50th birthday as I wrote these poems. And so there are endless puns on 50-ness in the book. There's one 50-line poem that each line has 50 characters in it, which I really should have composed in a monospace font instead of counting every character, but I didn't figure that out. And there are also, 50 word poems and 50 syllable poems. This is the 50-word one, and it's called Illuminated. It's about learning cursive and signing the L in my name again and again and being obsessed with that. But L is, of course, also the Roman numeral for 50. Illuminated. Loopy with delight, I practiced cursive not on boys' surnames, but on my favorite letter. Symbol for large, language, lesbian. In a ship's log, lightning. 50, elevated, low gear, liberated. Love the eye up high, not left loose beneath. Last, never least, thrust tongue against palate and teeth. Now, release. I also published with Tinderbox Editions a couple years ago my first memoir, Poetry's Possible Worlds, which is also a book about reading poetry during a life crisis. And this is what I do during a life crisis. I read and I write. And at the time, I had just won a Fulbright to New Zealand, so I was there with my family for a few months. My parents' marriage was imploding in another hemisphere, and it was basically catastrophe after catastrophe. And terrible things were happening in the region I was in, too, including tsunami in Japan and the big earthquake in Christchurch. And it was an intense time, and one of the things I was doing was I was also reading about reading, and particularly this idea called literary transportation, which is a cognitive scientist term for getting lost in a book, that flow experience where you lose track of time. So there are 12 poems by other people reprinted in full in the book, because one of the things I'm doing is I'm making the argument that although the narrative theorists don't think so, you can get lost in a short poem. It can transport you. There's only one poem of my own in the book, as in the coda, in which I talk about the flow experience of writing. And so I'm going to read you that one. It's about my mother's first bout with lymphoma, and it's called Fire Ecology. This was essentially, I was driving back and forth from Virginia to her home in Pennsylvania and trying to help her move from hospital to hospital in the process of getting diagnosed, which, as you know, can be hard. Fire Ecology. Before chemicals burn her scalp bald as a cindery match head, she rattles with fever. Gray blonde tree clinging to rock, she's weathered extinction events, eruption and glacier, scorched and quenched as if by centuries. Thought herself past cataclysm, but there's always another storm cloud hunching in. Cancer jams her, grips kidneys and wraps hard around womb's gap. What was freedom becomes kindling for chemo's controlled burn. She blazes in the hospital bed, in my useless arms, naked shaking scrap of flame wanting conflagration. Here comes flicker and fall. Pine smashing down mountainside to oxidize on a valley floor where leaf litter sips ice slow. The paradox of life out of death feeds bloodroot striving through snowmelt. Well, I always wanted children, she whispers to the smoldering vista. Antibiotics drip cool into a bruised arm. The poisoned world all understory. To need, the smoke resembles hope, love. And look, she says, look at you. I'm going to read one from my forthcoming collection and then one more from the state she's in, and then hand it over to our laureate friend over here. The next book I'm publishing is in March 2025. I was honored that it was a finalist for the Dorset Prize, picked by Diane Seuss, who's somebody whose work I just adore. And it's called Mycocosmic, which I know is a weird word, but I got obsessed. My mother had another bout of lymphoma, and she died. And as I was working through that, you can see I always have side obsessions. The side obsession was with fungus. And I got really interested in mycelium, this sort of underground fungal brain that helps trees communicate with each other, and without which death would overwhelm the world. So I think both the fact and the metaphor of it became really helpful to me. This is a poem called Return Path. It's got that kind of underworld in it. You'll hear some repeated phrases. It's a villanelle, but I'm thinking of it as a dirty villanelle. Like it plays loose. Return Path. The only way to pray is through my feet, earthward, jolted and returned by the fizz of a spiking current. I never thought a circuit would loop through me, believed I was separate, alone, done with gods, But here it is. I found a way to pray. Through my feet, I reach down. There's something animate, mycelial, that touches me back. It's a species of love, a thinking spike, a zinging circuit of energy and dirt, blood and spirit, plutonic conversation, mostly wordless. The way I found to pray is through my feet, sole bare to wooden boards or rug or slate or buggy grass, just as you want to press skin to a beloved's, sparking a current, a circuit. Not that the earth loves me exactly. Matters what matters. She wants me to return the mess of my only body, pray from head through feet as I sink, unthinking ash into love circuit. There are a lot of spell poems and prayer poems in that book, and there are a few in the state she's in as well, so I'm going to close with one that I keep hoping will be an obsolete spell, but it's not. It's from 2016-ish. It's got a very quiet participatory element, so it won't bother the introverts. But it's got 3 blank spaces in it. I'll say blank when they occur. For the first 2, think of somebody you'd like to banish from the universe. For the 3rd, think of something delicious. All-purpose spell for banishment. A pox on blank and the gerrymander he rode in on. Expel, export, exile him while we smudge sage smoke around. At this 0 hour, as our wombs contract under the moon, cast him out. Groper, loomer, cheater, rapist, harassing mogul, bully, frilled Narcissus of a boss. Evict without visa. Dissolve his assets and social media accounts. Let there be no comb-over strays stranded on sofa backs, no despotic perfume. Erase his name even from rumor, from amygdala. Remove all dimples left in moss by cloven loafer. There is no blank. There never was. As the last syllable of this incantation sounds, it breaks over us how light we feel, like lemon mousse in a silver dish on an early spring morning before the leaves grow in, each cell of foam trapping nothing but sugar and sunshine. On our tongues, only blank. Thank you.
That was so fantastic. Thank you. I have been a fan of Lesley's writing, and I don't often say that, but it's been quite a while, and I know that when I first started teaching poetry, there was a poem of yours in an anthology that I taught, and I'm not sure which one it is. I have a vague memory that it was one but writing on art, an ekphrastic poem, I think, maybe is what I saw, and I didn't know I would ever meet this person, and happily have met Lesley a few times at AWP, the writers conference. So now have we ever gotten to read together before? I don't think so. So this is exciting. I feel like I'm just in the wrong place for this microphone. Can you hear me well enough?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been going around doing Poet Laureate things, which does not much involve me reading poems to anybody, surprisingly. So this is fun. This is a treat to read a little bit. So I'm going to read a little bit from Little Big Bully, which is my 2020 book, and 2020 books kind of did not get a lot of attention. So people are like, what? You have a book? And I'm like, yes, it came out in 2020 when nothing happened. So but still, it's not new to me, so I'm also going to read some things that are more new to me. This is a poem that starts the book, and it's more for different weather. You have to think about how cold things are sometimes. And how loves how I love you, how we hang on words, how eaten with need, how we need to eat, how weevils sift the wheat, how cold it is, how thick with hoar frost, ice slick, sleet freeze, how wintry the mix, how full of anger, how gut sick, how blue-lipped, how we drink a health, how we care, how easy over as eggs, how it all slides, how absurd, how yet tender we all, how wrapped in a thick coat, how battered, how slender the flesh, how we wrap ourselves, how many selves we all, how I may miss you many, how I see you, how your eyes warm mine, how tiny am I inside, how enormous my need, how you open an old-fashioned satchel, how deep it yawns, how bleak this need, how like winter, how it yet catches the light, how brilliant the sundog's perihelion, moondog's parasaline phenomenon, optic, how fetching your spectacles, how my thumbs might fit alongside the slope of your nose, how my own glasses slide down the thin bridge, how ridiculous the theory of the land bridge, how inane the bibble babble, how we grew to be friends, how we grew thumbs, how opposable we all, how we grew, how water will not run, how we distract, how loud the dog snores, how loudly, how noisy the snow grows, how many degrees below, how we fret, how again, how we all came here, how did we come, how did we, how loves, how did we come to this? So that's a bit of the politics of 2020, or 2019 when I wrote it. And then the book has a lot of things happening in it, but mostly it's looking at the mechanism of abuse. Like, how do we participate in our own abuse? Something like, when you live somewhere that is the site of colonial action, how are you living there is participating in it? Some of the similar thing to what Lesley was talking about. And what is the opposite of it? And this is what I think of as the opposite: sovereign love. When I look upon the beloved, the real beloved, not the beloved of memoirs made up in revenge, but the active generator of love, the love maker. When I look upon you, beloved, I might avert my gaze, let it stay only to your hands, then up to your throat. It is only in holding your eyes away from mine that I can stay sovereign in my love. It is only for you, it is not from me. It is more than state or nation. This love is itself unto itself. The only name it needs, it speaks within me. Call it what you will, it will answer. So it moves back and forth. There are quite a few love poems in this book about abuse and bullying, which I find very odd. And they're sort of couched in the time of recognizing that we're in a precarious place as a nation, wondering about the place that I always heard about growing up with a German-American father who was in the Second World War, who served in the Second World War, whose older brother could not serve in the war because he was born in Germany, who was a pilot, who trained pilots, whose father was harassed and blacklisted in his profession because he spoke German. And then he took us to Germany when we were teenagers, my younger sister and I, the youngest of his 7 kids. And we met our German cousins who we found knew less about the war than we did. And that was really interesting in the 1970s. So this is called Variations True. Subtle color variations of lilac keep coming back to me. Late 1970s, I asked my adult cousins in Germany, what did you do in the war? We were young, they said. We didn't know. All was normal, they said. Normal, auf Deutsch. We took our bikes, they said, out of the Stadt, the city. They went to gather flowers, some seasonal fest they biked to dance, to eat, to sing. I imagine them in wide skirts with aprons maybe, on curvy bikes with wire baskets filled with lilac blossoms overflowing and abundant and all the young things. I imagine them pedaling back on a day that happens later, but time collapses in these instances and I see them braking heavily when they find the city ruined. Then they run to the river that actually happened, survive waves of flame, too late for my father's grandparents, already dead in the rubble, buried in debris. The city later piled into an enormous hill that grew over green and inviting along that same path my cousins biked, and recalled when I asked, "What did you do?" "Normal," they said. I never understood, instead kept lilacs in my head, so many pinks and faded inky purples that turned blue in age, so many stages of one bloom that might not even grow there, but my mind maybe stood lilac as a substitute for a German word. Normal, they said. I never knew how many variations of a vision we can spin to make one image that might not even have been true, but now is now, and now I know we do. So, and then, skipping through many poems that are clearly enraged, I will read one for something I thought of when we were talking. We got on the phone just before we came here, and we're like, what are we going to do without Athena? And we talked about a few things in our books, so hopefully you will ask Lesley about the tarot deck, and I will read you this poem so that you can have an entry point. This is a poem about the Fool card in the tarot deck. It's always been my favorite. I always get it, and you think people would be embarrassed by it, but it's about just like going out into the world, looking back and falling forward. It's about tripping, which is what I did to break both my arms. But it is also thinking about a person you may or may not be. You're looking back and moving forward, right? I feel like a fool, do you? A tarot deck fool, looking back to see if you are looking back at me. I'll trip right off that cliff. Once in North Dakota, in my actual childhood, I saw a hobo, that's what we called them then, with an actual red bandana bundle he had slung on a stick. He tried to get me to walk under a bridge with him. He said he had a great gift. My bigger sister sniggered at that, or there'd be a red dress hanging on a tree for me too. Which brings me back to the fool, tumbling ass over tea kettle into some gully, having fallen for it. Then dusting fool's self's ass off, pick yourself up, start all over again. This is a world of men, this tarot deck, and sure, the world. And yet I won't give a single pronoun for it. We were both fools. We are all fools. Once in my actual adult life, in a hideous time of lies, our own stories were required of us. Fool though I feel, real and truly fucked though we may be, I picked my first person. I set my truth free. Fool me, fool me. So, and then just to not leave you in that space, I'm going to read a poem. There's the poems in the end are sort of toward my children and toward students and people, younger people going out in the world. And this is just a poem about how the hell do you know who your kids are? Any of you have kids who are now adults, you realize, how, and it's also about Ojibwe language. I have quite a few poems that have Ojibwe language in them, because I'm always studying it and learning it and fooling around with it, and I'll read some from my new poems. But in Ojibwe, there's not a pronoun. You have to add in a sort of kind of person to make a word male or female. But in the grammar, there's no pronoun, so it's not male or female. It's just a living being that how it escaped our attention. When a whole being births into your hands, still you see your hands, no matter how unworldly the beauty of the child. Then the universe of words works past cosmology to a useful name, a handle in English, unlike the indigenous genderless language of verbs. Moon blues, comet misses, moon looms super, moon bleeds. Many cosmological shifts later, our hands eclipsed by the lovely being come so far, come closer than ever across the several heavens we Ojibwe name, the layers of our atmosphere, then further out there, the fourth sky, forever sky. When you first came to us, we did not have an Ojibwe name. To know the sky, beyond the sky, beyond the sky. How were we to know he was, she was, they are, you? How were we to know who? So those poems end with somewhat thinking of the future. These poems are not new either, most of them. They're just the poems that were hanging out for a long time. But I wanted to share them as poet laureates, so some of them are from working with other artists who are not writers. So I'll try and find one that's a little more new, but I'm just so unfamiliar with my own manuscript that I'm like, where is it? Oh, and they all look so sad. They're not though. This is a poem for that I did for Zorango Dance Theater, the flamenco dance company that Susana de Palma is the principal for. She allowed me and fostered me as she made a dance. She allowed me to do the libretto for it, and it had to do with a child in the 1950s who imagines that Zorro is going to take care of everything and is going to be her hero as a Italian and native child living in Wisconsin. So the stories tell the story of how she thinks that a hero could fix her family, which she only vaguely knows is broken at the time because her grandmother and her aunt, or her grandmother's two children, her mother and her aunt, were taken away to boarding school, and she wasn't allowed to have them back, and then they wouldn't come back when she finally got a chance to get them. So WXYZ. She prints in black crayon WXYZ, letters for animals this kid has never met. Z is for zebra, Y is for yak. A train wreck of little used consonants, a pileup at the dead end of the alphabet, WXYZ. Then Zorro slashes a Z across the curved glass of her TV, and a deep unknown X solves with a dark hero who could be some kind of mixed blood, maybe. Some answer to all the words with W. Who, what, when, where, and sometimes why. And then I'll read just the second one of those poems. I was so shocked to learn when I went to rehearsals. Well, first of all, I've always been shocked to learn that when you're a writer involved in an art performance, they want you to go to rehearsals. It's like, can you just read what I wrote? I was really shocked when the musicians came in from Spain for this production, and they were like, when I came in, they were all whispering, and I thought, oh, I'll just sit here and not get in their way, and they were like, the poet, in Spanish, the poet has arrived, come here, tell us your poetry, tell us everything. And I was like, what? Susana was like, the poet's like the main person in creating a flamenco dance.
Really?
I was like, I did not know that. So they were like listening to everything, and we didn't have translations, I don't know, but anyhow. So these were also set to music, and an Ojibwe woman, opera singer, sang some of them, and I won't even try, but somewhere out there in the world you can find them with an incredibly operatic composition. This one is called Walking the Frozen Road. The woman whose daughters were taken away from her by her white husband and sent to a mission boarding school in Wisconsin walked through the winter to try and get her kids back. Walking this frozen road, I see Waboose, the rabbit, uncrusted snow, calm in the moonlight, not even a shiver in the silver tips of its pelt. I freeze through and think of you, dear ones. Listen through your dreams singing, that's the stars who shattered into brilliance in the black sky and grew still. Listen within that stillness, footsteps. What else can a mother do but come for you? My dears, you must learn to be as Waboose, rabbits who pose no threat, rabbits tense with energy that sprung like traps and tricky, outwitting a fox when he pounces. Walking this frozen road, seeking you, telling stories into your dreams. Nights spark with speaking stars and something in the moonlight, fox, streak of warm silk aflame. Walking this frozen road, I see my two girls, my little rabbits, grown white, grown still as snow, cold in the moonlight, not even a shiver, no silver in their eyes. Listen, within that stillness, footsteps. What else can a mother do but come for you? And then, so then there's 3 more poems, and it tells the story of how she just gets almost all the way to Madeline Island and realizes she's gonna have to walk back alone. And then she begins to some sort of friendship with some nuns and priests, hoping that will allow them to give her kids back, but they don't. But with these nuns and priests, she becomes alcoholic, and then as the rest of her life, she lives kind of this isolated existence in the small Wisconsin town, trying to have a relationship with her kids, every now and then getting very drunk and chasing the priest around town because she hates him so much. They're famously some kind of, so I'm just gonna read the very end of this. What a strange parade we make, fox with black swinging cape, his black fur outlined smile, curl of tongue and the teeth, white as ice and the moon at noon. Oh, my dear, strange fox language fits into my mouth. That's what you see when I pound through town, cape of crows, slinking fox, strange old woman, followed by the moon. She stutters with anger in words you've never understood. It's a wonder how the moon waits, as grandmothers wait for years until our children's come home. Moon waits, it's a wonder, soon the dear ones come home. So those are the little, I haven't read those, I don't think I've ever read them to anybody, so. Very old, but I'm going to finish there, and we will chat with folks. I was thinking maybe we should move this out of the way though, because we can't see you on that side, and please just forgive me if I don't recognize. Oh, we have a microphone. Okay.
Yes, I will do this.
Yeah, we pull this, and then pull this back a little bit. And if you don't chat with us, I have an exercise.
We'll make you work.
We'll have a phone together.
Can I start with a question for you?
Sure.
So those gorgeous poems and powerful poems about the mother following her children, is this in the book that's coming out next year?
It should be. It is in a book coming out, hopefully by the end of the year, a very tiny chapbook, which I have never done before, so I'm excited about a small book. And it includes prompts for poems from working with art, so it's sort of phrastic and collaborative.
Which leads to yet another question I have for you.
Okay.
Will you tell us about, clearly collaboration plays a huge role in your artistic life. And will you tell us about that and how it works?
Yeah, I didn't know that I would be a collaborative artist. I really love visual art, and I wanted to be a visual artist, and had taken it very seriously and studied very hard earlier in my life. And then I just decided it was too competitive, it was expensive, and I just couldn't see myself doing it. And by then I'd had some success writing poetry mostly, and started even to get some things published. So I thought, I don't see as much competition in this area. I can carry it with me wherever I go. I don't need much to make a poem, so I think I will lean more into the poetry. I wish that I had known about filmmaking, because that's truly like the combination of both for me. And some of my first collaborations were with dancers, but they also had a film component. So dancers and filmmakers are quite a few of the people who taught me, where our skills cross over, and where, you can use some of those professor skills too, right? Because you learn how to edit, you learn how to get somebody to tell you what exactly they're trying to say. So have you worked in collaborative hybrid situations? I know you write a lot of kind of genre busting work, but
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of collaborative writing. I had a friend who does a lot, and he and I had this conversation in sapphic stanzas for a few months once, and published a group of poems, and that was ridiculously fun. And my spouse is in the corner there, and he's mostly a scholar of comics, but he and I have collaborated on an article on the Poet HD, and on a comic together once, which was really fun. But I'm also, that flow experience of being by myself is one of the core things I go to writing for. So I think although I watch him collaborate with scholars and artists in so many different fields, I find myself doing it way less. It's fascinating that you were a visual artist in your first life.
yeah, well, my mother is a visual artist, and I think that she always had us make art, and she praised that very highly. So I thought that was, she's like, if you can do it, you should do it. And, I think that was part of it. My younger sister is quite a fine artist, and she's illustrated some children's books now. She's a doctor in real life, so so she gets all the points for being both an artist and a doctor, because that's the other thing. Mom was like, if you can be a doctor, be a doctor. So there were two things, that were really highly. So, part of it I think was that I really do love visual art, and now I work as a curator, so I work with a lot of visual artists, and I feel like it's not obviously the same, but it's like being a good editor, it's like you're there to help their stuff look good, and there are a lot of collaborative aspects of that work too. So,
And I guess editing, I'm a poetry editor for a literary magazine, so that has that element in it too.
yeah.
That it just feels beautiful to deliver somebody else's work to a public.
Yeah, but I think maybe I don't have that introverted time interrupted as much as, because I'm not teaching constantly.
Right.
So maybe if you're teaching, that going to yourself, my first 3 books were made mostly of those times when I could just get in my own head and follow my own thoughts. And even Little Big Bully, I did most of that during a polar vortex in 2019 when, yeah, so we couldn't leave, and it was really, really profoundly cold, and we just sat around a heater with blankets over us, and I would reach out every now and then and type something. Yeah, I got literally bored with TV, which is my favorite thing in the whole world. I had to write, and I was alone a lot of that time, so I could just in my head.
Well, we could keep asking each other questions, but do you have questions? Is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, Lesley, I know you read a poem that was connected with a spell and so forth.
Yeah.
Can you speak more about how you see poetry and spellcasting connect?
Yeah.
Should we repeat the question?
Yeah, I should. So the question was about how poetry can connect to spellcasting, and I do, anybody who knows prayers or participates in religious services will recognize that the intersection between those kinds of language, which involve repetition and rhythm, but I also, I found myself writing a lot of political poems, 8-10 years ago,
I
and
wonder why.
yeah, and I found, and also because I'm a teacher of undergraduates at a liberal arts college, I found myself thinking about, well, what can poetry do anyway? And every once in a while, of course, there's a poem that really moves and mobilizes enormous groups of people. I think more often what it does is it's a more internal and private experience. Like, people read poems at inaugurations very powerfully, or at weddings and funerals, but for me, some of the most powerful poetic experiences have been listening to an author or sitting quietly and reading a book. And I started thinking about, well, okay, so there are some public experiences I've had with poetry, there are these intensely private experiences, and I started to think, by what mechanisms can poetry participate in good change? And it seemed to me that that the quality of petition that spells and prayer poems have, of asking, even if you're not sure whom or what you're asking, that process feels very powerful to me, and I often feel like it charges the language with power too. So, I could talk about that all day, but that's that's, I guess, a short-ish answer. I bet you have an answer too.
Well, I have a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
Have you ever had a work of yours, poem, made public in a way other than publication?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about occasional poetry before, and I mean, a couple of experiences. There was a poem I wrote for a friend whose baby had died, and she framed it on the wall, and that near about broke me. I've also was commissioned to write a poem for the 20th anniversary of coeducation at WNL, and I had to do it twice, because WNL was one of the last of the top liberal arts colleges to coeducate. So this was in '85, and so I went into the archives and I started to research interviews that WNL professors had given to national media, places like the New York Times and Newsweek. One quote that's always stuck with me is, "The education of men is a serious business. The education of women is a frivolous business. The serious and the frivolous should not mix." And so the first thing I did was I wrote a furious Sestina. Just collaging it, and then I showed the poem to a friend and she said, "Maybe not." And then I wrote a different poem that was about positive experiences I'd had working with women-identified students. And that was one of my adventures in occasional poetry, and I learned a lot from it. How about you?
Well, I just gotta say that I love the fury in your poetry. That is and your prose. Oh my gosh, you should. I don't even know what to tell you about this novel. But definitely has some female fury in it, and it's an academic novel for any of you who have had to endure the academy. But yeah, I was thinking about, like, the first time I remember a poem of mine being somewhere. It was a poem about childbirth and the female body too, and it was I was giving a reading, and this woman came up and said, "I am nurse midwife. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. And she said, did you know that we read from your book on the floor of the legislature in Minnesota? And I was like, no. They were trying to make some changes in the laws around midwifery, and I had several poems in the book about midwives. Some were not so great, but some were. And yeah, so I was like, what? The poem actually went to the law? Like, that can happen? It had never occurred to me. And then after that, I was like, that was profound to you, listen to it. There's a way of, being in the world. It's like something felt, listen to it, look for it, listen for more of that. And so in some ways, I started to not necessarily write toward that possibility, but think that, the poem is intimate with its reader and somewhat intimate with its listener, but it could be something other than intimate. And yeah, I just hadn't thought of it that way.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a cool experience. Some other questions? Yeah.
In my youth, I was a singer-songwriter, wrote thousands of songs, and last year I released my first novel. And the way you use words is so different. I had to really learn about a novel, but I don't really know poetry. And so my experience is writing the novel, I tried to inspire going from judgment to compassion. Writing songs, it's like I came from the know-it-all position. I had the beginning and the end. I felt like I was there. Where does poetry sit on that spectrum?
Oh, there's so much music in your poetry.
Yeah, I would have been a singer-songwriter if I had any ability, and I will still make people listen to me sing no matter what.
I do too.
To learn Anishinaabe-Moan, our language, I was lucky enough to be tapped to go into a ladies' hand drum group, so I sing Anishinaabe, sing my heart out, even though I'm not great at it. I love doing that. But yeah, so the visual artist was second to being the singer-songwriter, which I couldn't be. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of closeness between a song and a poem. You have to be aware of the music in the poem, like literally the meter and the way the line runs. Although I'm terrible at scanning my own poems, other people will scan them and write about that, and apparently I did it right. So I try not to think about it. I can't do it. It was the part that I always skip when I'm teaching. I'm like, and here, you go to this link if you want to see how to scan a poem. Because there's so many ways a voice can do something. Like, with a song too, people can glide over things and they can make the music fit the human voice, right? Well, poetry does some of that too. So it's really hard to say. But yeah, I would say that I'm more on the end of the song. What about you?
I think about poetry and music a lot too, and there was a mid-20th century critic named Northrop Frye who said that poems had two elements, and of course they have more than two, but babble and doodle. So the doodle is the visual and the babble is the musical. And I often think that when there were Greek words for it too, by the way. I like babble and doodle. That there's certain poems when I read them, I think they're using the visual element particularly strongly, that this is a poem you need to see on the page. And then there's certain poems that really are incredibly beautiful in the voice. You actually do both. Like there's a set.
Yeah, I do narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are the ones that I have little movies running in my head. I was starting college when MTV started, so poems have always been little MTV videos in my head. And then some point, like stupidly late, I was like, I could make little films out of my poems. Yeah. So I did that for about 10 years with collaborators, and that was just heavenly experience. I'm making one more this year with a TJ Turner, who is a Anishinaabe filmmaker. Looking forward to that. It'll be out in April next year. And then I don't know if I'll ever do it again. It's a lot of, like, way a lot of work. It takes so long to make a 3-minute film. But yeah, so yeah, I think those are more like stories, I think. More like what you were describing of a story in a way.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great question, and congratulations on getting your book out.
Well, I just got old.
I've written novels too, but I got so bored with my characters, I thought if I do not want to go do anything with them again. I was like, people, huh? It's like having friends. I don't, you know. It's a lot of work. I'm just too introverted to be a novelist. Some other comments or questions? Yeah.
I actually was on the Zoom during the year that nothing happened,
Oh.
when I heard you read.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Oh.
And I remember just like, I don't remember the poem that you read, but I remember you said you were traveling, and you were in, I don't know if it was a niece or somebody's bedroom or something, and it just felt so intimate and vulnerable and beautiful, and I just remember sobbing, like ugly
Aw.
crying. And then, but I didn't buy the book. I put it on the wish list, and I bought the book this year and read it on a road trip to Fargo. And then I sat in a coffee shop and just on like a 3x3 Post-it note, just wrote down how I was feeling about what I had just read. But what really is striking to me is the vulnerability and also the rage.
Oh yeah, that book
And-
is full of rage.
And I love that. And
Yeah, I think a lot of us
it's
do.
like that sacred rage is
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
referring
it's the fire in
to
us.
as,
Yeah,
yeah.
we gotta move it some way.
And
Yeah.
and exactly, and that kind of has me thinking about blending like somatic work with poetry,
Yeah.
and particularly around trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, comment, maybe a question is,
Well, there's a
lingering
little
there,
series of poems in that book where I take on a bear persona, and it's very hard for me to explain what that means, but it is meant to be very physical in between some of these poems, to just really think about. And to me, the bear body, I happen to be Bear Clan, but the bear body is like the closest thing to a human body that you can talk about without talking about humans. So it's very similar, right? And, you know, we learn a lot from bears. Humans have learned a lot from bears because they can eat the same things we eat for the most part, and they have similar gestations and all sorts of things.
Makunde.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, when I think about, like, I do think about where can I touch on the body when I'm moving between things. So in that particular book, I have little prose poems that are about bears and guns. They were like the only place safe where I could say things about guns. There's some dogs in there too to help me with. But yeah, I could see that. I could see it being something that you would speak to, a poem to help somebody get into their body, to work around their trauma.
I had a question about balancing teaching with creative writing. I mean, you touched on that quite a bit. I've taught high school English, it's my 21st year.
Oh, bless
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I started on the Navajo Nation, actually. And I had these dreams of, because I had been a poet, you know, in high school and college, and, you know, had a few poems published. And I'm like, I'm gonna move out to the desert and I'm just gonna write my little heart out, you know? But then I'm trying to inspire children, you know, kids to write. And I don't know, I know that it just requires some dedication. The only times that I've really been productive is I've, you know, written poems for friends' weddings or things like that. And I miss that, the feeling that I had, that poemy feeling that would just wake you up out of sleep. you know? So I don't know if folks have thoughts about how do you balance that?
Anybody out there while we think about it?
I have a hard time doing most kinds of writing when I'm teaching. I don't think my job teaching college students is as hard as yours, but I think that it takes an enormous amount of creative energy to work with them on their essays and their poems and all the other life stuff that they bring to you. And but I think you have to honor the poet in yourself and give her time and attention. And I don't succeed in this, but what I tell myself is the first thing I do every day should be the thing that's really most important to me, so that I try to carve out a little time as many mornings as I can to do whatever it is, to spend some time with the page or to read. And because I find if I leave it till later, there are moments where the lightning bolt will strike you and you just grab that moment and you jot it down. But you can't trust that you have to honor that energy in yourself more deliberately. It's a commitment, and
Yeah.
you can't, and you don't beat yourself up if you can't match it always, but.
Right.
And when I first started teaching, I did teach young people, and the energy was extraordinary, the amount it took to work with, people under college age. And so sometimes I would have like a ton of energy after being with them, and I could use it for writing, and sometimes I was just completely flattened, and I began to realize that I would have to be a farmer, I'd have to have seasons, I'd have to be a natural human being. I'm going to do this here, this time of year. So most of my books are written in the summer or in January when I wasn't teaching, when I was in an academic schedule. And I kind of just got used to that I would start writing at some point in April or May. I'd start to get the feels, and I'd start to write the stuff. And then maybe I could get back to it in January. So I still am sort of that way. I'm going to try this year to write, this coming year, 2025, to write in September. And I don't know if I'll get to write much this winter. I'm going to go teach out in Missoula, Montana. So, which I've never been to, but I just thought, if you get a chance to go live in Missoula, go do it. Although I Googled the address of the place we might live, and then the first thing that came up was an avalanche report.
Wow.
There's an empty lot across from our house where the avalanche took out a house, or from the house that I'm probably going to live in. So I'll probably write a fair number of poems about that.
It'll be a geological year.
Yeah, it might be a geological year. I might have to learn about that. I'm already thinking about the grizzlies, though. Like, I love bears, but grizzlies have always terrified me. So, not so into the grizzlies.
How are we doing for time, Sarah?
Well, we are a little bit past, but if anybody has any other questions or comments, feel free to ask me. We have room for one or two more.
Any last burning questions?
We can sign, Molly.
Do you have like daily rhythms that you tap into?
I vary it because depending on what my teaching days are. So, sometimes it's 5 days a week, but this term I've got a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so that Tuesday, Thursday mornings and sometime on the weekend I can be a writer. But that worked really well in September until the papers came in. And I'm already.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I could write a little bit in September. until
Yeah,
the papers.
that's right.
Thank you for reminding me. But I have such bad attention to schedule that I tuned out somewhere when she started talking, because I was like, that seems like a real schedule. Do-do-do, I'm gonna go somewhere else in my head. But yeah, I no longer have, I just do so many different things that I don't have much of a schedule. But I'm gonna think about that thing, the most important thing you should do, the first thing, I usually
Yeah.
worry, so apparently that's the most important thing. Then I drink coffee and look at Facebook, so I just check my priorities, thank you for that.
And I worry at 3 in the morning, that's my yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you. We'll sign books if you want to, and there's snacks, which are very much yours. Please snack. So,
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
This was wonderful.
thank you, Sarah.
And we're just gonna head right up to the glass display and we'll meet everyone there.
So I don't know how to turn it.
Oh, yeah, we'll just, you just said the bus wrap, I see that.
Well, I guess